In this video on Marx's labor theory of value, I show that the classic interpretation of this theory is flawed in some parts. As a result, the processes of value creation, the meaning of the values, and the function of the market are incorrectly assessed, which means that the main drivers of value creation and the importance of the market are not adequately taken into account in reality. The value is represented as a real social ratio. Such a social ratio can't be produced. It is shown that the machines and parts of nature contribute to the creation of value in the same way as human labor powers. With the interpretation of the labor theory of value presented here, all types of value formation can be explained. Does Marx's labor theory of value still matter? In my view, yes, because with it, the meaning of the value and that of the market become clearly visible. If one interprets this theory in a contemporary way, it can explain all value formation related to technical objects, to arts in general, to archaeology finds, etc. The value theory makes it clear that accesses to resources that are also accessed competitively are weighted by people. In order to be able to optimally carry out these weightings, the market and values are essential. The updated value theory shows that in addition to humans, also machines and nature are used as labor forces in the value creation process. A characteristic of all labor forces is that they need means of existence for their work. The classics say that the economy examines relationships between people. The value is such a relationship, a social one. Let's take a closer look. Value is important for economic exchange. In such an exchange, a potential buyer and a potential seller face each other. Both have potential exchange goods in their property. The potential seller the potential goods, and the potential buyer money as the value equivalent for desired goods. In normal social times, the fact that money also only represents a potential value equivalent in principle is not noticed, since it seems that it can always be exchanged for goods. The value as a social relationship works between buyer and seller. In this example and in the following, the seller is an entrepreneur. Economics describes how people relate to each other when they exchange goods. Marx and Engels say that value as a social relationship appears as a thing. In reality, however, it only exists at the social level. Value cannot exist in things. Rather, people assign values, among other things, to various objects, the exchange goods. This means the goods and the value equivalents. Goods and value equivalents are the reference points of value relationships to which the values are related. A reference point of a value relationship does not have to be an object. According to Marx and Engels, the value is represented by the work of human labor in the goods produced. This view is not correct because concepts, the content of books or patent specifications, also represent reference points for value relationships and thus also for values. Here is an overview of various potential buyers and potential sellers. Not only individuals should be understood by this. Let us first look at how the classic interpretation of labor theory of value explains value. An entrepreneur produces a product. That costs him money. He needs workrooms, machines, prefabricated components, communication services, etc. Marx describes all these things as constant capital. The entrepreneur buys labor forces. At Marx, only human labor forces count as real labor forces. He describes them as variable capital. But the entrepreneur pays the labor forces only for a part of their working time. In the unpaid working hours, they work out the surplus value for the entrepreneur. The surplus value is the real goal of capitalist production. The principle with surplus value works like this. The capitalists pay the labor forces according to their values. This corresponds to the so-called paid working time. But the value of the labor forces is so low that on average the labor forces produce more than it corresponds to their paid hours. Marx describes this with the words that they thereby work a part of their working time free of charge. The capitalists take the results of unpaid working time without compensation. In other words, entrepreneurs can get the surplus value because workers cost them less than they get by selling their work results. To take the surplus value without compensation corresponds to capitalist exploitation. Marx comes to the conclusion that the value will be formed from the production costs C and V and the surplus value S. He calculates the value of a commodity by adding the proportional parameters C, V, and S, which in his opinion flow into the work products through the production. From his point of view, the value will be built into the commodities with the production. According to other authors, the value will be firmly linked with the commodities by the production. In a more detailed description, Marx explains that it is not the directly spent working time, but the socially average working time that is included in the value. However, he does not mention that the socially necessary average of working hours does not exist as such, but only comes about through different real working hours that are effective through the market, i.e. through different real values. The commodity is brought to the market together with their value. On the market, a more or less pleased buyer sees the goods with the value that is associated with the goods as a price tag. The buyer puts the commodity in the shopping cart and goes to the checkout. At the checkout, depending to the situation, he can acquire the commodity at their value, below their value, or, if it is bad for him, overvalue. The variant that no buyer buys the commodity should not exist at all, according to the classic interpretation of labor value theory. If a commodity is not sold, it would have no value, since the work done for the commodity in such a case was not value creating. However, Since the value is supposedly created with production, such a case should not occur. What is the problem here? The capitalist does not even seem to have to sell his commodities, but he can still exploit the labor forces and thus also can get the surplus value, that is, what he ultimately wants, so he can't go bankrupt. What does Marx say about this? According to Marx, value is created through human labor and is brought into the commodities with the production, and then only has to be realized. How should the entrepreneur understand this statement? The value should exist, but it still has to be realized. Then it is probably not there yet, not usable for him. Exactly, that's how it is. Value is a social relationship. It works between people, the value concrete between exchange partners. Such a relationship cannot be produced as a singularity. Marx relates the value formula to the production side of the commodity society. But there is still no added surplus on the production side. The buyer can only pay it on the market. On the production side of the commodity society, there is only an expected surplus value, consequently only an expected unpaid working time, and therefore only an expected value. Production only creates expected values. In this formula, C and V are used as cost factors with their replacement expected by the sale. Added to this is the expected surplus value S. Altogether gives the expected value. The entrepreneur combines this expected value as the offer price with the potential commodity and brings it on the market. Let us consider the life cycle of a value relationship. An entrepreneur has a product manufactured. This initially remains as his property. He offers it as a potential commodity on the market. In this example, he calculated an expected value of €220 from the cost factors C and V and the expected surplus value S. He combines this expected value as the offer price with the potential commodity. With this offer on the market, the entrepreneur unilaterally initiates a value relationship. At this point in time, it is not really a relationship between people, but it is a beginning. The offered device has no value and will never contain one, but it is the reference point in the value ratio, i.e. later on the market it can be assigned a value. However, there is currently only an expected value associated with this potential commodity. A potential buyer discovers the product of interest. A purchase would be possible because he has enough money in his property. But the potential buyer also has other wishes. He wants to travel, he needs new glasses, he wants to go to the theater, etc. So he has to wait. The potential buyer evaluates his needs for various goods that appear necessary or at least reasonable. The rotor seems particularly important to him. He builds up a heavily weighted need for the rotor. However, the offer price of €220 seems too high for him. He weights it at €180 and tells it the seller. In doing so, he actively contributes to the value relationship that the entrepreneur previously initiated. The procedure described here is typical for a bazaar, but also for the negotiations between device manufacturers and various sales chains. The entrepreneur now builds a connection to the potential buyer via the value ratio. He captures the offered value equivalent. He gives the value ratio a second reference point. The entrepreneur must now decide whether he accepts the purchase offer, rejects it, or whether he proposes an alternative price. The entrepreneur ends his brooding by offering a new offer price, €210. The potential buyer has to rebalance. The new price influences all weighted needs of the potential buyer. He may have to include things in his weightings that he has not previously considered in this context. The potential buyer ends his decision-making and decides to buy the device. He signals his consent to the entrepreneur. So both partners of the value ratio come together to a common value, €210. In a bazaar, they agree in a dialogue. In a department store, the buyer usually has to adapt to the seller's offering in order to be successful. But even there, buyers and sellers consciously form a common value. This is an important condition for the exchange. The common value is an objective one. It goes beyond the subjective impression values of buyers and entrepreneurs. It is formed by both at the social level. The value as a social relationship must have an objective part that works between people and is formed or at least accepted by everyone involved, i.e. that must go beyond the subjective value impression of individual people. The objective part of a value ratio is the common value. It is reflected in the sales price. However, as a social relationship, the value must also have subjective parts because it is coupled to people and their consciousness processes. These ideal parts of the value relationship are the subjective reflections of the objective value in the exchange partners. The objective part was formed out from the initially different subjective parts. Both the buyer and the entrepreneur can have further value impressions, but these are not socially relevant. They remain as subjective ideas by the exchange partners and are not part of the value relationship. With the exchange, the potential buyer becomes a real one, the potential seller becomes a real one, the potential commodity becomes a real one. By reimbursing the expenses and paying the surplus value, regardless of the amount, the buyer recognizes the usefulness of the expenses for him and thus for the society. Marx's wording that only socially useful work creates value expresses the importance of exchange for value creation. The real value is only assigned with the exchange of both the goods and the value equivalent. As a result, the value formula for real value can only be applied to the market. W real equals then the costs that will be replaced and the real surplus value. The fact that the value is only assigned to the money with the exchange too can only be clearly felt in times of crisis. The term surplus value means that the entrepreneur earns more with the sale of the commodities than the production costs him. This can only be achieved if the buyer completely replaces the costs C and V and also pays more, namely the surplus value S. This also makes it clear that the real value is not formed directly from the expenses and the expected surplus value, but from the replacement of the expenses plus the real surplus value. Only prerequisites for value ratios can be produced. Whether such are formed depends, among other things, on the assessment of the work results by initially only potential buyers. Only with the exchange does the offer price become the sale and purchase price according to the common value between buyer and seller. The potential commodities only become real ones when they are exchanged. Completely objectively, the buyer will only be given the commodity he wants to the extent agreed. Only for the socially relevant, i.e. the objective value, the value-added tax will be paid to the society. The migration of purchasing power in the amount of the common value is also an objective process. After the exchange, the entrepreneur has completely objectively only more money for the agreed sum of money, and thus for the real value. For this he gave the commodity that were worth exactly this sum of money. Then the buyer owns in his property objectively less money in the amount of the commonly agreed sum of money, and thus also the real value, but for this the value equivalent object to him, the former commodity. Buyers and sellers are now also losing their properties as such. The exchange ends the value ratio, and the common value is also objectively relevant for society. Let's summarize what has just been considered. The value is calculated using the formula shown. The production costs are only indirectly included in the value, namely through the buyer. He converts the expenses together with the expected surplus value to real value. The change is carried out by the buyer together with the seller by replacing the seller's costs and paying the real surplus value. The expenses can be fully or partially replaced. If no replacement is made, there is no value creation, since the work involved is not even partially recognized as socially useful. With the replacement of expenses and the real surplus value, the buyer recognizes the expenses as useful for him and thus for society, and thus as value creating. The money transfer to the seller corresponds exactly to the value that is assigned to the commodity. With the socially relevant assignment of the money to the commodity by both exchange partners, the value is assigned to both the commodity and the value equivalent in the same amount by both exchange partners. Value is formed and assigned using a value relationship. Value creation takes place separately from the processes with which the prerequisites for value creation are created. Before assigning the value equivalent to the commodity through the purchase on the market, the value is not given. Before, there is only the expected value. The recognition of expenses in the form of work as socially useful, which is also necessary for Marx for the value, cannot be produced. Value does not directly reflect the expense. It reflects the recognition of expenses as socially useful by replacing expenses together with the real surplus value payment. With positive surplus value, more value is recognized than the expenditure required for the product. For the value creation, important are the facts that the work results are not freely available in connection with weighted needs that are sufficiently strong for the exchange. Expenses associated with costs usually have to lead to restricted availability, but not generally. Ownership on e.g. natural goods and land under appropriate social conditions will lead to claims for compensation in the delivery of goods for property. The consideration money means that the buyer transfers a part of his right to a percentage of all goods subject to the economic exchange to the seller as compensation for the delivery of the commodities. In addition, in a restaurant, the values are assigned the food and drinks in the same way as the factory products on the market. For a soup, e.g., the owner of a restaurant would like to get replaced the costs C&V for the soup ingredients, heating, room rental, cleaning, equipment, etc., as well as for the employees and himself, and in addition he would like to earn a sufficient surplus value. If he meets the taste of the customers with the soup, he will succeed. Otherwise, he can try to cook differently. No value is built into soups either. This can be illustrated by a large saucepan for 100 soups, from which 80 soups can be sold in one day and 40 in another. No cook adds value for 80 soups on one day and for 40 soups on the other day, equivalent to socially useful work. The same costs arise. Only the replacement of them and the real surplus values, and consequently also the values that are assigned to the different quantities of soup sold, are different. At this point, the two social relationships of value and property should be compared. Both social relationships are formed and work only on the social level. Outside of this, there can only be reference points for social relations. The social relationship of property works for the owner. It makes the connection between the owner and property clear and legally binding for the whole society and almost always beyond it. The social relationship value works directly between buyer and seller or entrepreneur and makes the exchange of goods for value equivalent effective for the whole society. Let's take a closer look at ownership first. Ownership is assigned to the owner in a legally binding manner by means of the social relationship of property. This assignment is not a physical, but a social one. The physical appearance of property lies, e.g., for houses, outside the social level, but the social meaning of property always in it. This becomes particularly clear with a book. The object of property is the point of reference for the social relationship of property. Property as a social relationship is not built into the object of property, but only assigned at the social level. The property can be assigned an expected value for the event of a sale, for insurance benefits, etc. Expectation values are assigned to property even in the case of manufactured potential commodities before they are sold. Let us now consider the value. Buyers and sellers or entrepreneurs assign the social relationship value to the exchange object's commodity and value equivalent in the context of their value relationship. The hallmark of the common assignment is the common value, which both agree on. In many cases, a commodity lies outside the social level, but in some cases also within it. In the case of money, the material appearances, coin and paper money, gold coins, digital money, lies outside the social level, but the social significance of the material appearances lies within it. Both exchange partners assign the value to both exchange objects during the exchange. Value is not contained in any of the exchange objects. Social relationships must include an objective component with which they become effective at the social level in order to be considered as such. The value size of common value is the objective component of a value relationship. The reflection of the property object on the social level, as well as the social assignment of the property to the owner, are the objective components of the social relationship property. In terms of value, the subjective reflections of the common value, i.e. the objective component of value, are the subjective components of the social ratio value. In the case of property, the subjective component is the ideal reflection of property in the owner's consciousness processes and in all those who come into contact with this property at the social level. The reasons for the value are the non-free availability of the exchange objects in connection with needs that are sufficiently strong for an exchange. These needs are always weighted because both the buyer and the seller practically always have further needs for purchases, respectively sales, for other exchange prices, etc. The non-free availability can be attributed to one or more causes. Weighted needs that are sufficiently strong for the exchange are based on qualities of the exchange goods that are deemed to be sufficient for the exchange. In normal times, this is given in case of money. It is generally seen as a reflection of an entitlement to a percentage part at all economically distributable goods. The situation is different with a potential commodity. In the examples shown here, an electronic device is used as a potential commodity. The individual parts used for this device, such as circuits, printed circuit boards, wires, antennas, etc., are also available individually. But that's not what the buyer here wants. He wants the finished and tested device. As a result, the items for this potential buyer are not of the quality required for an exchange. During the production process, the router will be manufactured from the separate parts. The production process consists of quality improvement processes. It is checked, packaged, and shipped so that this end product will get the necessary quality for many purchase requests. It is not only the quality of the desired product that is important for value creation, but also that it is not free available. The paid work is an important reason for the non-free availability of the work products. However, this connection is not mandatory. There are promotional items, gifts of art given away, and a number of other things that are made by paid workers but are distributed or accessible without economic exchange. Usually, however, the products of paid labor, regardless of whether people, machines, or nature work on them, have to be sold in order to maintain and expand production. Buyers and entrepreneurs relate the sum of money as an equivalent to the end product they assign the money to it. The transfer of a value equivalent corresponds to the economically relevant recognition of the results of quality improvement processes by labor forces. However, a right to consideration based on property can also be appreciated with a value equivalent. This affects, e.g., vintage cars, natural goods, and archaeology finds. In such cases, the quality improvement processes were often carried out a long time ago, and therefore they do no more directly affect the scope of the potential goods as part of a production or original purchase process carried out under the owner. The evaluation of such work results differs significantly from the reviews of currently manufactured products. The value creation process by such objects is largely based on other characteristics. The term labor theory of value is fully justified because the value is ultimately always based on work, but not only on human labor, as explained by the classic interpretation of labor value theory. But in all cases, the work is only indirectly included in the value. The necessary and also superfluous quality increases are brought about by human and mechanical workers, as well as by the animate and inanimate nature as labor powers. These create possible points of reference for value relationships and thus for values. In agriculture and in breweries, nature has a particularly significant share in the design of possible reference points for value relationships. In addition to the main products, unwanted outputs are always generated as part of production processes. Important additional outputs are listed here. This issue is examined particularly thoroughly by ecological economics. That the labor theory of value was elected as the basis for economic design, e.g. in the GDR, was definitely not a good decision. Marx has presented the process of value creation in such a simplified manner in the labor theory of value that no economy can be designed and controlled on this basis. It wasn't his goal either to develop a means of economic control, but to show the principle of capitalist exploitation. For this purpose, he can abstract from unsold products and products that are not sold with the expected surplus value without running the risk of missing the main target. So he can make the statements that are important to him without any annoying extras. In practice, two main problems for the economy have been created with the labor theory of value and its interpretation. The first main problem, the production sphere, was seen as the real place of value creation. The economic values were considered to be produced after the completion of the production processes. The money was put into circulation according to the supposedly produced values. What did that mean? This led to an excess of purchasing power compared to real goods and services. The second main problem. The market was not considered as important and therefore little attention was paid on it. The prices for practically all goods, for rents, etc., were set for long periods, and the excess purchasing power was not reduced as a result. Further fictitious values were added every month. So a comprehensive shortage economy was created. As a result, this led to major problems with competing access to resources. We now want to take a closer look at that. To the first main problem, the circulation of money. What happens if the expected values form the basis of the money issue? An example: 9 television sets were produced. The 9 television sets were reported as produced values, and the GDR State Bank circulated the corresponding amount of money, in this example 7,200 mark. Of these 9 devices, 4 were sold with the full replacement of manufacturing costs and with the expected surplus value. At the time of sale, each of these devices was assigned the expected value of 800 mark as a real value. 2 devices could only be sold with reduced surplus value. Each of them was assigned a value of 600 mark on the market. 3 devices could not be sold. Consequently, no real value was assigned to them. 9 TV sets are shown. 4 devices that could be sold at the expected value are shown in a green area. The remaining 5 devices that were only sold at reduced prices or not at all in the light blue area. In connection with the money emission policy described above, this resulted in a real and in a fictitious range of values. The money was put into circulation on the basis of Marx's labor theory of value for the supposedly produced values of a total of 7,200 mark. It was said that the market has no part in value creation. But the real values were different. Only 4,400 mark should have been issued for these TV sets. The money for the green area was correctly circulated. But for the blue one, it was 2,800 mark too much. Nowadays, such money would be called Vollgeld, in English words full money or full reserve banking. In reality, it was Vollgeld with a significant share of hollow money. Both amounts of money, that of the green and that of the blue area, were incorporated into the values of the labor forces and the other income earners. Thus, the values of the labor forces and the other income earners were based in part on fictitious values. The values of all income recipients reflect the scope of the means of subsistence which can be bought by or for them. For all part of their income, there were no means of subsistence. Since prices were kept constant over long periods, this led to an increasing extensive shortage economy. To the second main problem, the inadequate market attention. For example, due to the situation described, several interested parties wanted to buy a color TV set, but only one of them succeeded. But they all got the money for it. That it was exactly this one could be related to his luck, by illegally leaving the workplace to appear at the dealer in time, with personal relationships, with special value equivalents, supply of scarce goods, or a certain amount of foreign exchange. Almost everything was lacking in industry. It was probably similar in agriculture. The range of scarce goods in retail was quite large. Cars and spare parts, many tools and building materials, services, certain books and magazines, telephone connections, certain furniture, special clothing, many types of fruit, popular types of wine and beer, restaurants and vacation spots, hotels, precious metals, video recorders, home computers, PCs, diskettes, and so on. Almost all available resources are limited in all economic areas. Since people need different resources for their lives, they have to weight their needs for the resources that are not freely available and thus the accesses to them, because nobody can buy everything he wants. However, the access to a number of freely available resources must also be weighted, since their use is mostly associated with time expenditure. Most resources can only be made sufficiently available for weighted needs. However, under a shortage economy cannot be weighted meaningfully because, first, the real values of many goods and services and therefore their optimal prices for the society are not known, and second, in many cases there is no way to get the goods and services at all that seem important. Due to these problems, the products and services cannot be optimally manufactured or offered for society as a whole. This also affects the production and supply chains backwards, right down to the raw material and energy suppliers. The inefficiency of the national economy and households has been cemented. The following 3 slides are about the connection between market and values. This picture shows important stages of the supply and production chains of some goods. The raw materials are sold in various qualities and quantities to various interested parties. In addition to the competing excesses, also the quality of the raw materials, the extraction costs, the transport routes, and power structures affect the prices. The end device manufacturer in turn competitively accesses standard parts, prefabricated assemblies, and prepared materials. Energy and water are competitively accessed in all areas. Economic processes in these areas are modeled in the context of complexity economics. Storage capacities are required in all nodes of the business chains. The accesses onto them are done competitively. The picture shows the bearings before the end device production. People have many different needs, but they buy using weightings because their resources to buy and to use goods are limited. In all sections of the economic chains, exchange processes work on an economic basis, which are based on weighted needs. Without a market, needs that are related to the economy cannot be weighted meaningfully. If it is not possible to weight sensibly, the economy cannot be designed efficiently. The demand sizes for natural goods, standard components, prefabricated assemblies, end products, etc. do not remain constant. Various causes ensure that they are changed again and again. All requirements are not about general, but about weighted needs. With planning mechanisms that only process demand quantities, but not their weightings in connection with other demand sizes, the demand for raw materials and everything that happens to them afterwards cannot be designed efficiently. Economy is never about the absolute usefulness of things and processes, but about their relative usefulness in the given social and natural contexts. The scope to which resources are made available depends very much on how important people rate their use. Without market and weighting for all uses, no efficiency can be brought into the economy. What does usefulness in the natural and social environment mean? Let's first look at the economy in connection with the natural environment. Headphones intended for people should be able to reproduce the frequency range that people can hear, i.e. the products should be optimally adapted to the nature of people and their specific natural environment. But also the production itself does not work independently of the natural environment because it is embedded in it. To leave the decisions about disposing of unwanted production outputs only to companies would result in disadvantages for companies that also take care of the environment, because in most cases the effort involved in processing such outputs will be associated with significantly greater burdens. Such guidelines have to be set by society as a whole and, if possible, internationally. This leads to new foundations for the optimal production efficiency of companies. This also applies to specifications for the possible products, the materials to be used, and also the sales guidelines. In the picture, packaging and cars are given as examples. In the case of cars, the influence of such decisions on the optimal efficiency basis, also when using them, becomes particularly clear. Not all the important influencing factors that should be considered are mentioned here. In the agricultural sector, national and, if possible, international decisions about production options have an impact on the efficiency basis of companies and the economic performance of entire countries. The picture shows the question of using a forest area or a cultivated area. The latter means that certain decisions can not only be challenged internationally, but also have to be supported. Let us now look at the connection of the economy to the social environment. In addition to production, companies also have further social functions because they use many resources that society provides. Payments to employees and tax payments are of particular importance. Optimal combinations of product quality and pricing lead to high profits and thus high tax payments. This is how society benefits. It can finance more projects for the future in the social environment and to care for the natural environment. Companies also win retroactive, e.g. through better school and university education for future employees, through better infrastructure, etc. These are also factors influencing the efficiency basis of companies. Many companies also finance social institutions, construction projects, etc. This can include music classes in other countries, sponsorship of sports clubs, the financing of daycare centers and other municipal facilities, or works of art. There is no question that such direct additional financing services by companies have advantages, but they are also directly dependent on the success and the strategic decisions of the companies. Financing social tasks through taxes leads to more stable financing relationships because the dependency on the economic situation of individual companies is leveled out. In addition, politics should see larger societal relationships and derive more optimal resource allocations for society. Tax payments are predetermined, but any additional decisions about the way and scope of social engagement have an additional impact on the efficiency basis of the companies. Provided within the scope of the decision options changes the efficiency basis of the company, because it affects salary payments, the design of the interior, shaping the future, etc. Every society develops its economic form based on the prevailing forms of ownership. Values in the economic sense are formed on the social level, i.e. in the social environment. They work there to a large extent, but in the natural environment too. The essence of the market is also on the social level. However, the market also consists of physical components such as premises, squares, commercial facilities, product offers, infrastructures, etc. The essence of all these things is also on the social level, but their physical appearances are also outside of society in the natural environment of people and their society. The market doesn't think. The market doesn't steer. Everything that comes onto the market is planned by people. Everything that is bought on the market is decided by people. The market activities reflect relationships between people, which in turn relate to exchange goods. Selling and buying are supported by algorithms, but these do not replace relationships between people. Computer programs with algorithms have no self-interest yet. The essence of goods as such is also a social phenomenon that necessarily exists and works on the social level. But in almost all cases, these goods have material envelopes outside of society that can be called objects. Virtually, all elements of the economy can be privately owned. Likewise, all elements of the economy can be assigned to the state as social property. Cooperative property usually makes up only part of the entire economic form in all states. In theory, it would be conceivable that the entire economy is based on cooperative property. The economy of common good is the entirety of all economic forms in which the well-being of the whole, the common good, and not the private pursuit of profit is in the foreground. However, you have to work efficiently under all types of assignments. All currently practiced economic forms cannot do without market values and goods, because in the foreseeable future the resources will be limited compared to the needs of the people. As a result, there will be always competing accesses to resources that must be weighted to enable and shape the overall efficiency of the economy. It is important for all efficient economy that the access to non-free resources can be optimally weighted. The not free availability does not have to be based on private property. Conclusion. The classic interpretation of labor value theory does not express the essence of value, namely that it is formed between people and works there, specifically between exchange partners. Values of goods, values of the labor forces and the market are not explained in a meaningful way. The term labor force is unnecessarily restricted and the process of value creation is incorrectly localized. The current interpretation of labor theory of value, presented here, makes it clear that exchange partners develop a value as a ratio for the exchange of a good against a value equivalent. The value reflects a social relationship, as recognized by Marx and others, that the exchange partners assign to the exchange goods. With this understanding of the value, all value formation can be explained, and it becomes clear that value is ultimately always based on work, but it is not directly produced by it. It is also shown that unlike the classic interpretation of the labor theory of value, machines and in part nature, like humans, are used directly as labor powers to create basics for value relationships. In this way, the value formation becomes really tangible.